Hello, everyone. Good morning. Good morning here in San Francisco. I am located and based in San Francisco, and it's morning here. But I do realize that there are so many other people calling in and dialing in from all over the world, from other parts of the USA, but also from the Netherlands. I've seen participants from Germany, from the UK, but also from Asia. So if that applies to you, good evening, afternoon, and good evening. This webinar is about urban planning and transport after COVID-19. And we're having 4 panelists, and I'm going to introduce them to you in a bit. We're expecting about 250 people, so I'm so happy that we're having so many participants. And yeah, thank you all for signing up. And we very much would like to engage with you. So if you have any questions, comments, or feedback, please put that in the Q&A screen, and then we'd like to address your comments or feedback or questions as much as possible. My name is Jan Top, and I work for the Netherlands Consulate General in San Francisco, which is the official Dutch representation on the West Coast. Actually, we're sort of overseeing the 13 most Western states, and I'm working for the economic department, and together with my colleagues, we're doing our utter best in order to stimulate exchange between the Netherlands and the US, and in this case, California. Exchange on policy issues, but also exchange on cooperative projects, because we believe that both parts of the world could very much learn from each other. And you could use me and my colleagues as linking pins, because we are the official representation of the Netherlands in San Francisco, and we're trying to build up a good network amongst governmental officials, but also amongst companies. And we very much would like to introduce you, if you are interested in doing business here in the US, to introduce you to our contacts, but also vice versa. If you're interested in doing business in the Netherlands, we'd like to introduce you to relevant partners in the Netherlands as well. And did you, by the way, know that last year during our trade mission, during the Dutch trade mission to California, we signed a letter of intent on that we're planning on cooperating a little bit more on urban mobility. And that letter was signed by the Lieutenant Governor, Ambassador Kounalakis, and the Dutch Minister of the Environment, Roald Lapperre. So this webinar is also something you have to see as a result of that ambition. We'd like to highlight aspects we could collaborate on a little bit more. And in this case, we're going to talk about urban planning and transportation. And I'm very much looking forward to the conversation we're going to have. Not in last place, because I do myself have a background in urban planning and architecture. I graduated as an architect, and I've also been working with Rijkswaterstaat, which is the Dutch road authority in the Netherlands, and is very much working on how do we shape the relation between transportation in cities, and so I'm very much interested in learning more from the experts we're having today. Having said that, I know that many cities throughout the entire world are thinking of policies on how to shape urban transportation, and mostly that is about discouraging cars in the cities. I'm, for example, thinking of Amsterdam, who earlier this year announced that that they allow less cars in the inner city by just getting rid of urban street parking, but also by closing off streets. And we all know about the major artery, the Market Street in San Francisco, which got closed off for private vehicles in order to give more room to cyclists. So there are different initiatives all over the world just to give more room to other modes than only the car. But how is it going to be after COVID-19 or during COVID-19? And that's something we're going to talk about. How could we, learn from this situation? Because for example, urban transportation going to be as relevant as it was before COVID-19? Because I feel that a lot of people are getting afraid of using public transport, or is it, as some experts say, a window of opportunity to introduce the bike a little bit more? Now, these questions are going to be talked about during this webinar. And we're having 4 panelists. And my first panelist is Allison Arieff. She's a renowned design critic, and she serves as SPUR's editorial director. SPUR is the San Francisco Bay Area Planning and Urban Research Association, and they bring people together from across the political spectrum to develop solutions to the big problems cities face. And SPUR's mission is to promote good planning and good government in the SF Bay Area through research, education, and advocacy. Allison is also a writer, and she writes about architecture, design, and cities for numerous publications, and she also is the author of different books. And she's also writing for the New York Times. Our second panelist is Lucas Harms, and he is the managing director of the Dutch Cycling Embassy. And the Dutch Cycling Embassy is a public-private network for sustainable bicycle inclusive mobility. And they represent the best of the Dutch cycling. As the director of Dutch Cycling Embassy, he's responsible for the strategic development of the public and private partnerships they're dealing with. The third panelist is Paul Supawanich, and he's working with the transportation department for the office of Mayor London Breed. And he brings more than a decade of experience in multimodal transportation in the public, private, and technology realm. At a national level, he has also served as a transportation expert with a focus on public transit, planning, and street design in over 300 cities. And we're very much looking forward to hear from him. And our last panelist is Lucas van der Linde. He is a mobility expert with Mobility Flow, and Mobility Flow is the US affiliate of a Dutch planning firm, Hartog Koffing. And Mobility Flow consists out of data-driven mobility planners that adapt international best practices to the local American context to solve complex urban issues. And Lucas is going to elaborate on different projects he has been working on and how these projects could be applied to also the situation after COVID-19. I'd like to start off with giving the floor to Allison Arieff. Lately, she wrote a very interesting article in the New York Times called "The Magic of Empty Streets." And the undertitle is "Social Distancing Gives Us a Rare Chance to Fix Cities." Allison, the floor is yours to let us observe the world of transportation during COVID-19 through your eyes.
Thank you. As you mentioned, I wrote this piece, and in it I observed that as terrible and tragic as these times are for so many people, there is this slight silver lining and what I see as a window of opportunity. For days when shelter in place started, I kept looking at the sky thinking like, what's wrong with the sky? Why do the clouds look so different? And it's because the air quality has improved so dramatically over the past several weeks. And it struck me kind of how shocking it was that just with, and this was maybe like a week or two after shelter in place, that air quality had already transformed. And in fact, when I wrote that article, Los Angeles had the best air quality of any city in the world, which just seems unreal. So you see people out on the street walking everywhere. You see people having socially distant cocktail parties and in the sidewalk, and people on their stoops and on their balconies. And it feels to me like cities are actually being used the way they were meant to be. And it feels very much that cities are for people, not cars right now. So what I would be pressing for right now that we could learn from this and see if you give people this space, they will use it in the best way possible. And so what can we do to facilitate that? How can we make this an opportunity? There's a couple of things that I'd like to highlight here. We've seen over the last several weeks how much transportation is an equity issue. You see the people who rely on transportation and can't get to their work, and all the essential workers who would be at an absolute loss if public transit was not provided for them to get where they need to go. So it has really highlighted already a stark inequality that we have in our country, but how can we really think about public transit and transit in general as something that we need to address in terms of equity? It's really highlighted land use, namely how badly we use our land. The highways are empty in San Francisco. Normally, I mean, I can see 280, the highway which goes from San Francisco down to all the tech campuses from my window. Normally, it could take 2, even 3 hours, say, to get to Google from my house, and I could probably get there in a half an hour if I drove down there today, which I'm not because I'm sheltering in place. But as we look at these empty highways, we're like, why have we created a scenario where all these people are on the road all the time? And moving forward, how can we really fundamentally change our thinking about how we locate things in our society? This has been a great thing. San Francisco's done all these quick build projects and is thinking about doing repair projects while the streets are empty. This is a moment to think about rebalancing funding away from roads and towards transit. As you mentioned, Jan, this is kind of a frightening time for transit. Paul can speak more specifically to the details, but transit ridership is down precipitously in San Francisco and throughout the Bay Area and elsewhere. There is a real fear of how transit will get back on its feet after this. If we take all the funding that we have generally earmarked for auto companies and gas companies and airlines and really think about devoting it to transit funding, at least in part, which serves way more people, high-speed rail rather than airline bailouts, then I think we can really show a better path forward. We also need to think about repair and maintenance. It's not about creating the next Hyperloop per se, it's about fixing what we've got, making it better, more reliable, and safer. We need to think about how we're gonna navigate transit in the future and how to make it safe. There's a real fear that people will see that automobiles are the only safe way to get around, even though we all know how many people die from car fatalities and are injured in car fatalities or car accidents every year. So the perception that you're going to be safer behind the wheel of your car by yourself doesn't square with reality. We're going to really need to figure out how to reopen our cities thoughtfully and carefully. Any space that requires large numbers of people to gather is going to require huge health interventions, and that's sidewalks, public space, transit stations, airports, etc. In fact, these health interventions may supersede all others, and this is something that we've seen a lot in countries that are slowly reopening. As we move forward, we, again, really need to remember how dangerous cars are. I think everyone's forgotten because people aren't really driving. We've got to design our cities for people around cars. COVID, as bad as it has, just to recap, has shown us what it looks like when cities are designed for people, and it's my sincere hope that we can move forward with that.
Thank you so much, Allison. And I totally agree with you that, yeah, since cars are less on the streets, and right now there's a picture in the screen, right? You sent us, which is a picture of the Golden Gate Park with so many people just using their bikes on the street, which is usually a street meant for cars. And that's so very nice. And definitely gave us, yeah, a better air quality, and I very much like that as well. So hopefully, we could learn from that, as you said, and we could move that forwards after COVID-19 as well. Our next speaker is Lucas Harms, and I'm actually very happy that he is a part of our team of panelists. He joined last minute, and since he is like the managing director of the cycling embassy, I presume he has a lot of work to do because he was part of an article, he wrote an article together with the WRE, the World Resource Institute, which said that cycling is the silver lining. Cycling in cities is a big promise for how we could navigate through our cities sanely in the near future. So, Lucas, the floor is yours to give your take on whether or not this is the case.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Jan, I'm sharing my screen. Hope you can all see my screen. Thank you very much for this introduction, and I'm very grateful that I can be able to join this nice webinar. And I did, and I'm coupling to the words Allison was stating also, that I really think this is a silver lining. Although it's a horrible crisis, we can see here a sort of a window of opportunity. With the empty streets, with the opportunity to redefine and to reallocate our streetscapes in many different countries around the world. And we see that it's actually happening in many different cities, and not only in Europe, in cities like in Paris, Berlin, Milan, but also in cities in New Zealand, in the United States, in Philadelphia, and in San Francisco, LA, South America, and Bogota. where streets popped up, pop-up streets, but also slow streets were created. So this is a wonderful, in a way, a wonderful moment in time that which we can really redefine and reallocate and rethink our urban streets, and not only make it temporary, but also make it sort of more permanent. And I strongly believe that we as the Dutch Cycling Embassy can assist in that this change, these needed changes. And we see also that cycling is almost as a new toilet paper. In Australia, we saw a huge surge in the number of bikes being sold. So everywhere we see this spike in this new alignment towards cycling. So the Cycling Embassy, Jan was already mentioning it very briefly. We are a public-private partnership, and we bring the best cycling knowledge from the Netherlands, based on 70 different partners. Public institutions, NGOs, research institutions, and national local governments. We do that worldwide. For the last 10 years, we've spreading and connecting our Dutch experts with many countries and cities around the world. And why Dutch cycling? Of course, probably for many people already very aware that the Netherlands is one of the most successful cycling nations. We are home of more bikes than people, 23 million bikes and 17 million inhabitants, 23,000 protected bike lanes, but also a staggering 75% of all our urban streets have been traffic calmed. So there's a lot of space for cyclists. But many people are not aware that it not always has been a cycling paradise. And a short historical perspective can show that in the early 50s and 60s of the last century, cycling levels were going down very, very quickly with the rise of the car. And urban streets were clogged, were congested with lots of cars. The air pollution became very bad, and lots of accidents happened, and many people were being killed in traffic. So we had a sort of a traffic safety crisis in the early 70s, and people demanded change. There was a Stop the Child Murder movement, the Stop the Kindermoord in Dutch, and people demanded change. People didn't want to have all those traffic accidents anymore. So there were lots of mass protests, and this coincided with a large oil embargo, which meant that the oil prices were spiking. And therefore, suddenly it became very expensive to use a car. And when the national government also announced that there would be car-free Sundays, there was no car use possible, the streets were suddenly totally empty, just as it is now in many cities around the world. And all these unsafe avenues were returned to the public realm. And for many Dutch citizens, this was a sort of an eye-opening moment in Dutch history, when all the residents realized that they could not take safe cycling for granted, and unless their city's car-centric design was dramatically transformed. And that's exactly what happened in the last 40 years in the Netherlands. We introduced lots of more safe space for cyclists, with protected bike lanes, with traffic calming, and we redesigned our streetscapes. And we think this eye-opening a moment that happened in the early 70s in the Netherlands, which is happening now also in many other cities around the world, is sort of a unique moment, and that we can use this unique moment to reinstall and to redesign the streets in many cities. And we definitely think that cycling, as have been shown in the Netherlands, can be a very powerful transformational tool, which can change our cities to make it not only more sustainable, but also more safe, more social, more healthy, and more happy places to be. So let's use this moment as a testing ground for change. And we are very much happy to help you out based on our knowledge of the last a couple of decades, last 40 years, in which we redesigned our streetscapes in the Netherlands as well. So that's basically our main message. If you want to have more space for cyclists in your city, there's no need to reinvent the wheel. And we as a Dutch Cycling Embassy, and with our network of experts, we can help you out creating this much needed change.
Thank you, Lucas. Thank you so much for your take on how cycling could be part of our near future. This, but also has been part of the past, and how we learn from disasters and major events, and how cycling became sort of part of the solution. We've got a short intermezzo now in order to for the participants to ask a few questions to the both of you, to Allison and to Lucas. And I think let me have a look at the questions. The first question is about what is the role and how could we also as citizens in certain cities contribute to design urban planning and transportation the way we want it to be. Allison already mentioned, for example, that money which is right now attributed to like airlines and to gas to gas institutions, that money should be attributed to like the transit system. But how could we as citizens contribute to this change? And this is a question for the both of you. Maybe we could start off with Allison.
Sure. I mean, I think it would be amazing for everyone who's enjoying their street closures right now to send a little note to their local representative and their state representative and say, this is amazing, can we keep this? You know, I think everyone is quick to complain to their city departments and rarely do they congratulate them for a job well done. Throughout the Bay Area, mayors and local officials have shown really great leadership. Oakland has closed 78 miles of streets. San Francisco has a huge street closure program. New York is closing 100 miles of streets. Let people know that you appreciate that and you would like to keep it. I think that the loudest people are always the people who love their parking spaces and will go to great lengths to tell people to keep them. So it's a start. You can put up cones on your street. You can do temporary interventions. I saw someone put a little, their kids were playing in the street. And so they had put some little signs out just so, because the street wasn't shut down. So you could do little interventions like that, but I think this is a huge voting issue. And so I think that that's a great place for individuals to start, is to let their officials know how much they appreciate this and want it to continue.
I'd like that. So there's something we could do as well as citizens. What do you think, Lucas?
Yeah, I totally agree with Allison. That's very powerful, that the demand for change and the people that are saying that they like these changes, they want to have this as a sort of permanent solutions. That I think that's very, very powerful, in combination, of course, with this strong leadership, that people really show their leadership and also change this for the better. Again, there's possible sort of historical perspective again that in the 70s. Many Dutch cities also turned towards more cycling, but there was a lot of resistance from car stream people, and overnight some changes were implemented, although there were some death threats to mayors of certain cities. But this powerful leadership in combination with the big demand for change of people that demanded more safer streets and more space for cyclists and pedestrians, that made all the good.
Thank you, Lucas. And I see some more questions in my screen, but I think it's just good to move on to the next two speakers, and then we're able to address some more questions at the end of this webinar. So the next speaker is Paul Supawanich, and as I already introduced him, he's working with the mayor's office. And Paul, what I didn't tell is that Paul also helped craft the NACTO, N-A-C-T-O, which stands for National Association of City Transportation Officials, and he designed the urban street design guidelines. And I was wondering how these guidelines could still help us shape the transportation in cities after COVID-19. Paul could probably elaborate on that a little bit more. So Paul, the floor is yours to tell us about your past experiences and how these could inform the future as well.
Great, thanks, Jan, and thank you again for everyone for letting me join you today and talk a little bit more about the city of San Francisco's experience, and I think what we were hoping to do with this. And Jan, to your question, What are the opportunities given, perhaps a little bit of my experience and my perspective on that, but I think echoing some of the speakers already, Allison and Lucas, in terms of what are the opportunities. One thing I just wanted to start off with, I know there's an international audience here, San Francisco. We are a city of about 800,000 people, kind of within the Bay Area, 7 to 8 million. And California, I know, was asked to speak a little bit about California's experience. Perhaps I can start at least with our little city here on the peninsula, that California and San Francisco is an interesting dynamic. I think traditionally, in the course of American history, as our country was motorizing, California definitely took that to an extreme example. If you look in many of our examples of building infrastructure in the mid-century, we not just built freeways, we built redundant freeways. And so we really made it easy for people to move quickly and easily while driving. And I think San Francisco is a unique counterbalance to that, as we are amongst American cities, at least, more European, more dense, more kind of quaint neighborhoods, compiled with this balance of a high car ownership. So in many ways, we are set up to succeed in terms of building a great transportation system, given our density, but also have a lot of confounding factors which have in the past at least prevented us from perhaps getting to the place where we want to be in terms of a great transportation system. In terms of your question, Jan, in terms of street design, I think street design has everything to do with what we're dealing with now in terms of how we deal with the current situation we're in, but also in terms of the recovery. In San Francisco, as in many places, the physical width of our streets makes up one of the largest proportions of public space. And I think as leaders in our cities and advocates, we all are kind of jockeying for that space in terms of how it gets used between the movement of people and goods, whether that be in a vehicle, a bicycle, or a scooter, perhaps using it as public space, perhaps using it as space for economic activity, like cafe spaces as such. So I think that's always a difficult kind of tug of war in terms of how cities use that space, as we all are trying to think about what its best use is. And I think what we're dealing with right now with the pandemic, there is question around how are we using that space. Clearly, the demand for travel has dropped precipitously. Allison already mentioned with respect to our transit system, the demand going down. But we have this kind of opposite need of people needing to have a 6-foot buffer around them everywhere they go, whether they be within a vehicle or walking on the street. So again, needing to be able to use this open palette or canvas of our streets to adapt quickly to the needs at hand. And I think that's what we are starting to do here in San Francisco. You were just showing a picture of Golden Gate Park. Just starting actually today, about 2 hours ago, we are going to be opening that street to people, just as you saw in the photo, 7 days a week, whereas in the past it was only done 1 day a week. And again, that is in response to the current needs that we have right now. Similarly here, we are choosing a network of streets to also open up to people. We're calling them slow streets. They are still open to vehicles, but the intent is to slow down vehicle traffic to an extent similar to many streets in the Netherlands, where we are trying to make them closer to a shared street so people can both have mobility, but also use it as more public space or recreation space. And this is what we've been thinking about right now. Maybe I'll just transition a little bit to kind of how we are thinking about this, as at least in our city, is that right now we are focused on our public health order and how are we ensuring to the best extent possible we are reducing the spread of the virus, but also giving people enough space to at least get out and exercise, maintain their mental health, maintain their level of physical health. And we've set up our transportation system similarly, knowing that we have to get people to work who need to get to work, such as medical workers. People still have to go to the grocery store. And so we've had to really quickly change the way our transportation system acts in that way. But I think very quickly we're going to need to think about our recovery. And I think it's already been touched on here that there are things that we are seeing today that we certainly want to keep in the future. Air quality benefits. In San Francisco specifically, we have not had a pedestrian fatality in the month of March or so far in the month of April, which is completely bucking trends from the past. And we know that's because less people are traveling. So these are the things we want to keep. And we need to figure out a way to make sure we keep those benefits while also supporting an economic recovery. And so I think a lot of the things we're saying here, perhaps it's things that we wanted before. We wanted to shift our modes to more sustainable modes. We wanted to get some of these benefits we're saying. And I think a lot of this has to do with not so much what we're saying, but how we're saying it. And I think that for us here in San Francisco, needing to rebuild our transit system, as we can talk about here in a minute, and our other modes, to again, support this economic recovery as we all need to make sure that we can get back to work and rebuild the economy. But as Allison and others have said, how do we make sure that we keep these benefits that we've seen so far and we've had the opportunity to experience in a short order? So I'll stop there, and then I know we'll get to further questions in a moment.
Thank you, Bob. We definitely will. So after Lucas's presentation, we will open up the floor to some more questions. So now's the time for Lucas van der Linde, and he told me that quality of life for all citizens is a central concept of his work as an advisor. And I'm very curious to know about how this notion is manifest in the projects he has worked on, and also whether or not these notions could still hold in a post-pandemic world. Lucas, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Jan, for the introduction, and I will indeed talk about that, and I will also about some data in general, and I hope you can all see this screen. We'll talk about some data regarding the impact of COVID-19 on transportation and relate that to some of the concepts that we use in the Netherlands on urban and mobility planning. Within the company that I work for, we did an analysis on the amount of kilometers traveled per day per mode in the Netherlands. And since the intelligent lockdown, as we call it in the Netherlands, has been announced, there has been a decrease in mobility from A to B for car and transit. But what we see at the same time is that people, and that also relates to well, what the others have talked about before, is that the percentage of people that make a journey without a destination, just to go outside and to reclaim public space, that has increased since the start of the intelligent lockdown in the Netherlands. So instead of traveling from A to B, we travel more from A to A. And what these graphs also, the graph on the right side also shows, is that it's mostly done by biking and walking. So what is interesting is that people actually temporarily reclaim public space, also what the others already discussed. Cars are just less there. And even though the Netherlands is already quite friendly for active modes, for cyclists and for pedestrians, you can also see that in the Netherlands that just cyclists and pedestrians are much more prominent in the streetscape. And the interesting question then is, of course, to what extent this will stay and to what extent this will lead to an even bigger paradigm shift and more space for active modes in public space also in the Netherlands as a result of people appreciating this public space, but also in the long term, post-COVID-19, that people potentially travel less, work more from home, and all of this will impact the amount of traveling from A to B and result in a pattern of traveling that people will just stay more inside their own neighborhoods, and as a result also enjoy staying in their own neighborhoods, and as Allison has also talked about, potentially politically also the amount of people that want to increase the space for active modes in public space, because this in the end, of course, a reallocation of public or an allocation of public space towards the different modes, that idea will change in the whole society. Also in the Netherlands, even more. And then to relate back to what Lucas already told in his presentation, the Netherlands has already gone into this transition, or part of the transition, towards more active modes in the past. And Lucas also told that not has always been the case, but it has resulted after decades of policy making into a model split that you can see on the screen here, in which car is not so dominant in the main Dutch big cities, and that that is different obviously from cities in the Bay Area. So that is already the case. And one of the most important elements or determinants in this is the concept of dare, able, or invite to cycle. And the basic question there is for whom are you designing this public space? For whom are you designing, well, these cycle paths? Because what you often see is that when you start designing this public space and also think about this allocation of public space, that there's hardly any infrastructure, for example, in other cities in the world for cyclists, and that as a result, only people between 18 and 28 years old feel safe enough to cycle. And that is then really a daring thing in a way. But if you really increase the attractiveness, but also well, really invite people to cycle, to give them more space, that will result also in more cyclists, and not only from the group between 20 or 40 years old, but for people that are from 8 years old to 80 years old, as we say often in some of our planning in the Netherlands, because then everyone feels safe enough and everyone can have their own pace in the amount of space that is available if you think about this location of space. And this is an example of that clearly shows it, I think. This is an image of The Hague on the left side in the 80s, and the right side in 2017. And you can see on the left side that people are, well, that it's difficult for cyclists to cycle there. It's really a more dangerous environment. Whereas on the right side, which is at the exact same location, it's much more inviting to cycle for everyone in society. So that also, well, relates a little bit to equity, and also to give everyone the opportunity to cycle. So if we talk about the specific Dutch context, this concept of dare, able, or invite to cycle has proved useful in the past. And now it's, of course, the challenge to include COVID-19 physical distancing in the short term in this, because cycling is popular in the Netherlands, and what we see now is that it's difficult to keep this physical distancing, even though most of the infrastructure is already friendly to cyclists. But that is one of the challenges now. And what I also expect is that people actually value, even in big cities in the Netherlands, they value that there's more public space available and that there's less cars available. So that might hopefully increase or result into even more space available for cyclists and also pedestrians in this allocation of public space. Yeah, so that is just one of the most important determinants that we use in planning, and I'm curious how that will continue. And I also think that this concept, well, that is useful for other cities in the world and also in the US. Thank you for the presentation. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Lucas, for your very inspiring story, and also the sort of request to all of us just to act. I think right now is the time just to open up to the public and ask the different questions asked in the Q&A screen, and I'd like to address a few of them. I've got here a question for. I think it's a nice question for Paul, because somebody asks here, how do you change the mindset of policymakers, taking into account that it is pretty rough to change policies, right? And due to the COVID-19 restrictions, we've been able to introduce slow streets all of a sudden, but that is not normally the case. So how do we make sure that we are able and to keep on continuing this positive vibe? And yeah, what is the role of policymakers, and how do we change the mindset of policymakers with regard to that? So Paul, if you're able to elaborate on that a little bit more.
Sure, I'd be happy to. And I think this goes to a little bit of perhaps what I was trying to hint at earlier. I mean, I think a lot of the discussion that we're having today these are similar things that we've wanted before, but now we have an opportunity to talk a little bit differently about why we want them. And I think something that is going to be important for policymakers as we right now are thinking about the health pandemic itself, and then in the future thinking about economic recovery, is how does cycling or walking or other modes play into that? And I think something that's very real for us right now, and I think that this maybe leads to another question, is what is the role of transit? I know here in San Francisco that just initial estimates, even if everyone wanted to come running back to transit, which I know itself is a variable, our transit system can carry maybe 30%, 50% of what it did before. And that is explicitly based on the amount of space on the vehicle itself. So that means we're already limited by a significant amount in terms of what we can move. So that is perhaps point one. Point two, all of those people who we need to get on a different mode of transportation all do not own vehicles. And if they did own vehicles, we certainly cannot have them all driving for all of the different reasons of how cities operate. And so I think it's really important to think about how are we going to, how does cycling play into those, moving people back and getting them back to work. I think with the transit equation, there's a lot of things that are going to change. Of course, I already mentioned the space constraints. I mentioned the fact that the types of trips that people need to make in our city, just the travel patterns themselves are going to be vastly different. And just to give you an example, thinking about our traditional travel patterns in a city like San Francisco, where a lot of people are going downtown, office workers, and very dense. Those office workers are going to be perhaps the most likely to be able to continue to stay at home. And then it shifts then who needs to be traveling and how do we build that transportation system for who needs to travel to in-person jobs, and orienting our transit system and orienting our cycle network to meet those demands. And so I tell a little bit of this context because I think it gets back to the original question, how do we get policymakers to believe in that? We need policymakers to understand that a cycle network is not just about air quality, it's not just about safety, because I think those are very compelling reasons, but perhaps not something that everyone buys into. But everyone will buy into getting people back to work, getting people alternatives to transit, and allowing transit to continue to serve those who most need it. Perhaps those that cannot ride a bike, cannot walk, are of the fringe ages that Lucas was mentioning, where at least, and sadly not in San Francisco, it's safe for that. And I think those are important messages to carry.
Thank you so much, Paul. We've got here another question, and this is a nice question, I think, for Lucas from the Linde. Because he also said that we should act, and Frank asks here, how could we prevent to return to business as usual after COVID-19? Because after the oil crisis in the 70s, there were some changes, but no major changes. And how do we better after this crisis? So Lucas van der Linde, could you please elaborate on this a little bit more? Also taking into account what you just said during your presentation.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, of course. First off, it depends on the context, I think, of the country where you are and what is going on there. But it's really what I think this crisis really shows is the power of this reallocation of public space and for active modes, for pedestrians and for cyclists, and it relates a little bit to that's people, especially now they are so bound at home, that they are really using this public space in the surroundings of their homes just to get this well, only 30 minutes outside to walk around. That really shows for people, okay, this is really good, and this is really good for my well-being and for my mental state, and this is what I want also in the long term. So I really hope, and I also think that in a lot of places in the world, this can be the change that people really see what the benefits are of this, and that will also shift the political discussion, especially in bigger cities and more central parts of cities, to reallocate this public space. What also relates to that is that I think that people will more permanently, because everyone needs to work from home, that people will have that more in their routine, in their normal work as well. Also after post-COVID-19, that people will work more from home, and as a result, there's just less cars on the road, so there's more space available also for active modes. So those are the two main elements, I would say.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'd love to work more from home. I think it's. I mean, it makes things way more flexible. I mean, I can already start early in the day with writing some emails and doing some research. So there's actually way more time in a day it seems. But I think that some other people might think different of this. I was wondering, I already promised you guys that I'm going to ask the question how we could learn from each other, because I wanted to highlight obviously also a little bit the nexus between the Netherlands and California in this case. So this is a question for all of you, and I think it's good to start with Allison and then move on with Lucas Harms and then Paul and then Lucas van der Linden, which is how could you please mention one aspect which is transferable from either the Netherlands to the US or transferable from the US to the Netherlands. And let's start with Allison.
Okay, this is a tricky one. I think that so much of what we're talking about is a cultural shift, and it's a way of getting people to think about things differently. The United States is obviously in a very fraught political situation right now. We have a federal government that's not particularly interested in the things that we're talking about here today. So that's a huge obstacle, and no matter how much we all care about it, it's an obstacle that feels often quite insurmountable. But California has been exemplary in responding to this crisis. I think when we look at the examples that both the Lucases have talked about of, you know, the Netherlands wasn't always this bike central sort of amazing utopia, and it changed. And so we can learn from that here, that we can say that there are ways to change attitudes, because this isn't just about funding, it isn't just about building, it's really about getting people to think differently. And I think behavior change can sometimes be the biggest obstacle here. I really like the framing of dare, able, and invite. I think finding good ways to talk about these things where it's not super, you know, planners get all jargony and impenetrable so no one can understand what they're saying. Like, don't tell people we can become multimodal. You know, tell them that there's more opportunities to get around more easily, right? So really think about the language, because again, I think we got to change minds. And that's something that I think the Netherlands has been really exemplary in showing us in California.
Thank you. Lucas Harms, what do you think?
Myself, actually, one of the things that amazes me, last January I visited the United States. I was in the East Coast in Washington D.C. and New York, and what I mentioned that it was moving already very quickly. It was changing very quickly, and what I've seen in a year's time, that new bike lanes were being laid down in New York City. So I thought, whoa, it is changing quickly. And I think the speed of sometimes the speed of implementation that various states in the United States and cities have there, that's amazing, that it can change very fast. The ease in which new bike lanes, for instance, or pop-up bike lanes are being implemented, and that's sometimes really staggering. And in the Netherlands, we have come a long way, but it has taken us sometimes a very long time, 40 years of change. But these changes, so actually the sort of combination of the change in implementation of doing quick wins and fast implementation, and combining it with the Dutch knowledge, that would be a sort of an ideal way, an ideal fix, I think. So in a way, it's maybe it's very inspiring to see that already there was a change, there was a behavioral change. And a change in cities before this COVID crisis, and hopefully this can be a catalyzer for even speeding it up, and more people becoming aware of that these changes are for the good, and it creates more livable and more happy and greater cities than they used to be.
Thank you, Lucas. So the radicality is something we could learn from. Paul, what is your take on this?
Sure. Well, I was going to use a very similar example as Allison, so I won't repeat her eloquent words there in terms of what we could certainly learn from the Netherlands and the experience that you all had, and to know that it is something that it's not always been that way, and certainly it's not that way now here in California, but there's still a huge opportunity to change. And I will say perhaps one additional thing, though. I think using this current situation to make sure that to get to that point, or get to a place where we bring back a better transportation system versus we left it, just being thoughtful to how we invite people into that. Because I do think that oftentimes here and other places in the US, we see images of Europe, and it automatically kind of puts people in their bunkers to say, we can't be that, or I don't need to be a more multimodal city. But I think if we come up with the ways of framing what this place that we're trying to get to in a way that people here can understand it and are invited into, that's an important part of the change and the culture change. And I think this is just the right moment to be able to try to do so, given the current situation.
Thank you, Paul. I like that. And last but not least, Lucas.
Well, I think the first thing is that I also agree with Lucas on the radicality of some of the experiments and pop-ups in the US. But what I also want to say is I think that urban sprawl in the US is often seen as and also a lot of space allocated for cars on the roads. That's often seen as a bad thing and something negative, whereas also, especially now, you can also frame it as a positive thing, because there is a lot of space allocated for cars that you can turn into a more nicer space, nicer public space as well, and all these suburban areas as well. So it's also, I think, an advantage right now in comparison to the Netherlands, because the Dutch cities are very narrow and space is limited. So also expanding there the bike lanes and etc. is quite hard here, especially in inner cities. Whereas in the US, you still have that space to use it and to turn this into active mode. So I would suggest to frame that more positive in a way.
Thank you, Lucas. We're having a little bit of an issue with our system here, but I think everyone was able to hear you loud and clear. But that means that we're not really able to proceed with the webinar, which is actually which is a bit of a pity. I think. Oh, I'm looking at my colleague right now. Yeah, we're able just to. Yeah, everything is fixed. So let's just. Sorry for this intermezzo. So let's do one or two extra questions, and then we can close off because we already almost reached the hour. I see a lot of questions about cars, and yeah, the car being the ultimate mean to comply to social distancing. And of course, you all have said that we probably should move on to more diverse transportation system, which makes use of the different modalities. But here somebody asks, okay, what happens if we're really going to focus on the use of bikes, also taking into account that public transport, that people are a little bit afraid of using public transport, and how to be able to observe social distancing restrictions within public transport. And yeah, so then the bike will be obviously the right way to go to if you don't want to move towards cars. But what happens if we what happens if like the geography or the topography of a city does not allow us to use our bikes like easily? And I also think a little bit of San Francisco, of course, because I mean San Francisco is quite hilly sometimes. And I very much like it just to cycle through San Francisco, and it also gives us good exercise. But I can imagine that this is not for everyone the case. So you could like give a short answer on this. What will be what will be a right approach? And maybe we could start off with Paul.
I mean, this one's fairly short for me. I mean, e-bikes have already started to transform bike mobility for not only normal commuters, but I think about families, people that are carrying children. We just expanded our e-bike share program, so hybrid electric bikes, to 4,000 in the city, and it's slated to grow based on demand. Certainly the demand is not high right now, but that really has been a game changer for us, and I think has really unlocked lots of different parts of the cities in terms of places to go and places to get to that are accessible now by bike that weren't before for most people.
Yeah, and I agree with you, Joe, because I've been using one of these pedal-assisted shared bikes lately, and that's very, I mean, very convenient just to cycle through the city. One last question is about how COVID-19, how COVID-19, and we already talked about this a little bit, but how will COVID-19 change our daily commutes, also taking into account that we are probably going to work more from home, maybe, or as soon as everything is going to start up a little bit more. How will that change our daily commute? How will that change our daily commute?
I don't mean to be, I'm happy to jump in really quickly if it's helpful. I mean, here, I think it's going to be, I don't want to get into the mode, but I want to get into the person. And because I think the commute's going to vary very highly based on the type of person, the type of job that you have, and the type of job you have accessible to you. Again, I mentioned that I think a lot of people who are perhaps more fortunate, office workers, people that are in more jobs that are at a desk in front of a computer, certainly your commute may not be different than what it is at this very moment. And I think for myself included, I feel fortunate to be in that position. But I think there are a lot of people whose commute will continue to be in person. The jobs may change, the places they need to go may change. And the ways they get to those jobs, I think something that we're fortunate here in San Francisco is that we as the city manage the transit system, the streets, the bike share, scooter share hires, and we are going to need all of those different levers and those different tools to figure out how we're going to move people to their jobs, knowing that the rules in play are now going to be around social distancing, spreading out people to ensure that any future virus doesn't spread. So I think that we are going to, as a city, have to be scrappy to figure out how we take advantage of the things that we have to be able to move people safely and healthily in the future.
Thank you, Paul. Sorry, yeah, that was a little bit of a strange intermezzo because I was not able to hear you properly, but and to hear myself properly. But it has been solved right now. I think we should conclude this entire webinar, and I would like to give a big shout out to my 4 panelists: Allison, Arieff from SPUR, Paul Supawanich from the city. The mayor's office of the city of San Francisco, Lucas van der Linde from Mobility Flow, and Lucas Harms from the Dutch Cycling Embassy. I've heard some great aspects we could discuss further about, and I think we could have talked on way longer, but yeah, there's also time to stop a little bit. And I also would like to ask for a shout out for our participants, because there were so many participants with so many good questions, and we were not able to address all the different questions. But we'll look into the different questions, and if applicable, we will definitely get back to you. Tomorrow, every single participant will get an email with the link to this to the webinar, because the webinar has been recorded. And the email consists also contact details, how you could contact us. Because if you have any further questions, or if you have any further questions for our different panelists, just please reach out to me. And I know that all of our panelists are very vocal on social media as well. I've seen that Paul and Allison, they both have very lively Twitter accounts, and the same goes for Lucas and Lucas. So if you want to follow them or connect with them, I'm sure they're totally okay with following them via the social media channels available. So having said that, I'd like to thank you very much, and hopefully this will definitely give a further push to that we definitely can learn from each other. Not only the Netherlands and the US, but also other countries can learn from this crisis, and we could also learn from each other's best practices. So thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.